Progressive overload, what is it and how it's applied to bodybuilding? I hear a lot of people saying that progressive overload is just a myth or a mystery. I'm going to show you why it's not and why probably the reason you're not making progress is because you don't believe in practicing progressive overload. And people that are making progress that say it's not a thing are actually employing it and they just don't realize it. And my definition of it might be a little bit different than what other people's are, but I'm going to go through it today and I'm going to show you what progressive overload is in relation to bodybuilding. Okay, so my definition of progressive overload. It is an incrementally increasing stimulus which stimulates an adaptation by the body. Uh, Now, this can be applied to pretty much anything in bodybuilding. And bodybuilding really is, at its core, about stimulus and adaptation. This is what progressive overload is. We're constantly throwing new stimulus at our body to induce a stimulus, to get bigger, to get leaner, to get harder, uh, um, to get more tan. And in fact, I'm going to use tanning as my first example of progressive overload. Okay. So tanning is I think, is the most basic example of progressive overload. The stimulus in this situation is laying in the tanning bed. Okay. The adaptation um, is your body, the melanocytes release melanin, and the melanin makes your skin darker. Uh, the stimulus required to make your skin darker is the tanning bed. Okay. The darker you become, the greater the stimulus is required to become even darker. Okay. And the adaptation slows down as you reach your genetic limits. Okay. So when you're tan, you have to tan for a specific period of time. Okay. The tanner you get, the more time that you have to tan. Sometimes you have to tan more frequently as you reach the limit of time that you can you can tan. So let's say the tanning bed has a 25-minute limit or a 20-minute limit. When you reach that 20-minute limit, you have to tan with more frequency to achieve overload. And there's only so dark a person can get, okay? And that is based on your genetics. Training is the same way. When you first start training, it takes very little stimulus to generate a response. Okay, you see it with the newbie gains. Somebody comes into the gym, they barely do anything, they don't train with any intensity, they only come a couple days a week, and they make crazy gains. It's the best gains you ever make. Same thing with the tanning bed. When you first start, 5 minutes is going to get you, and you know tanner than what you were the day before. So there are variables to a progressive overload. In the instance of tanning, the variables are time spent in the bed, the intensity of the bulbs. If the bulbs are stronger, then you don't have to lay in as long. Frequency of the sessions, okay? How often you tan. Um, the progressive overload with tanning and with most things requires some sort of recovery, okay? Period. The body can only take so much stimulus before there's damage, and you have to walk that line of what is enough stimulus to stimulate adaptation and what is too much stimulus where you're causing damage. Same thing is true in the gym. When you first start lifting, it doesn't take much to generate an adaptation. If you train too much, you're just going to grind yourself into a hole. As you get bigger, as you get stronger, as your body has adapted more to the stimulus, the training in that situation, it takes more intensity, more time in the gym, heavier weights to make you grow. So it's the same thing with tanning. We talked about it. The tanner you get, the more you have to tan. Simple as that. So types of progressive overload. It's not just training in the gym or in this case tanning. things that we could apply progressive overload to in bodybuilding. Training is the obvious one. Nutrition. You're constantly changing your stimulus with nutrition to elicit a result. PEDs. You're using performance enhancing drugs to stimulate a response as well, and those can constantly be changed as well to elicit a different response or adaptation. So progressive overload in training, variables that we have, the load, how much weight we're putting on the bar. That is the most obvious one, and I think that's where people get stuck on progressive overload. They only think about weight. Well, there's only so much weight you can put on the bar, which is true. And people say, in bodybuilding, being strong is not the goal. Being big or having a great physique is the goal, which is also true, but it does take some weight to do that. Frequency, how often you train each body part also plays a role in adaptation. People don't think about that. Volume, how many sets you're doing per body part. That plays a role in adaptation. The actual time spent under tension, which is really what volume is, more time under that load is going to elicit a adaptation. Intensity, this is another one. How many reps you leave in reserve, how close you get to failure. Intensity modifiers, things like drop sets, rest pause, forced reps, whatever. Those all add intensity and potentially adaptation. Now, with weight training, there is recovery required. We talked about it before. If you go in when you're a newbie in the gym and you train like a 260-pound open class IFBB pro bodybuilder, you are going to destroy yourself. I remember when I first started training, I bought Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and it had his workout from when he was a Mr. Olympia. And I tried doing that when I first started in the gym, and I felt like I was going to die. And I had no idea why. I'm like, if I train like Arnold, I'm going to look like Arnold. It didn't work that way. Didn't work that way at all. You can't progress from A directly to Z. It's literally, you have to go A to B to C to D as you progress in the gym. So things have to ratchet up along the way. You can't jump from start to finish. It takes time. It takes years to have that kind of adaptation. Progressive overload in nutrition. So the variables we have in nutrition, how many calories you eat, the macros, how you're applying protein, carbohydrates, and fats to the diet, meal frequency. And think about this too. If you try to eat like that 260-pound open class bodybuilder, you're just going to make yourself sick and fat. You have to adapt to that amount of food over a period of time and create a metabolism and a physique that requires that type of caloric intake. You're just going to make yourself sick and fat if you try to eat like a pro bodybuilder right out of the gate. Progressive overload with performance enhancing drugs. Variables, the dose, compound choice, what compounds you stack together, length of time that you use them. Those are all play a role. And using too much too soon. I know a lot of people see, Pro A uses this amount, so in this stack, so I'm going to use it. You are not going to look like Pro A if you use the stack. What you're going to do is paint yourself into a corner. If you're 160 pounds using 2 grams of gear, what are you going to do when you're 220? I mean, where do you go from there? Okay, so you use the amount that's appropriate. The dose gets progressively more as you get bigger. The reason why bigger bodybuilders use more is because a bigger body requires a larger dose That's just that simple. I don't know why people can't put A and B together with that one. It just blows my mind. It's the same thing with any kind of prescription medicine. They weigh you and they prescribe based on your weight, the dose. A bigger body requires more. Um, Measurement. How can you progressively overload and get better if you aren't measuring anything? If you aren't tracking your workouts, how much weight you're using, how many reps you're doing, measuring food, same thing. If you're not measuring your food, weighing your food, how are you going to get better? How do you know what you're doing? Same thing with your gear. There's no progress in bodybuilding without progressive overload. Progress is in the word. Okay? So if you're not progressively applying more stimulus, you're not going to be any different than you were yesterday. This is, one of the things that I think frustrates the fuck out of me is so many people say, I don't know why I'm not growing. I don't know why I'm not getting better. I don't know why things aren't changing. Because you aren't fucking tracking anything. You're not actually practicing progressive overload. You're doing the same workout that you did 2 years ago. You're eating the same food that you did 2 years ago. Everything's the same. So if you haven't given your body a reason to adapt, it is not going to adapt. This is a painful process getting bigger, and you have to push your body past its limits to induce that sort of adaptation. It's just the way it is. It's uncomfortable, and unless you're tracking things, this is the thing with bodybuilding. It's a game of inches. You might do one more rep this week than you did last week. You might do one more set next month than you did last month. You might eat 100 calories more a day next month than you did this month. You might use 50 grams more gear next cycle than you did, or 100 grams than you did, or milligrams, sorry, than you did on the last cycle. So unless you're tracking things, unless you know where you're at, there's no way that you can progressively overload. Now, some people don't track; they just have it in their head, and they just keep doing more and more and more. They keep training more intense, and they adapt. Some people have better genetics. But I would guarantee you, if you actually went and monitored what they are doing and looked at what they're doing, even though they aren't writing things down, they have progressively increased overload and stimulus to the body to make it adapt. So they're practicing it even though they don't know. For those of us that are mere mortals, you have got to track things. It's the only way you're going to get better. Thank you for watching my video. Please like and subscribe. I got a lot of people watching my videos, not many subscribing. I really would appreciate it if you subscribe. It helps me with the YouTube gods. Video suggestions. I'm open for suggestions. If you have videos you would like me to make, questions and comments, feel free to ask questions and comments in the comment section. I will do my best to answer all of them. And follow me on Instagram at Paul K. Barnett. Thank you.